The fluorescent lights in the frozen foods aisle buzzed overhead as I reached for a bag of peas. That's when I saw them. My husband's hand rested low on my best friend's back, his fingers spread in a way that felt too familiar, too intimate. His voice was soft, almost tender, the exact tone he hadn't used with me in months. She laughed at something he said, tilting her head back in that practiced way she did when she wanted attention. Then she said my name like I was a punchline to a joke only they understood. Her eyes swept across the aisle and landed directly on me. She didn't flinch. She didn't pull away. Instead, she smirked. Just stood there with that small, cruel smile playing at the corners of her mouth. My husband noticed me a second later. I watched his face change, waiting for guilt, for panic, for something human. Instead, his expression hardened. He looked annoyed, like I had interrupted something private that I had no right to witness. In that moment, something inside me didn't break. It cracked open, quietly, cleanly, like ice splitting under pressure. I smiled. I actually smiled at them. Not a big smile, just a small nod of acknowledgement, the kind you'd give a neighbor at the mailbox. Then I turned my cart around and walked toward the checkout. My hands gripped the handle so tight my knuckles went white, but I didn't run. I didn't cry. I didn't make a scene. Inside my chest, something was screaming, but outside I was perfectly calm. I paid for my groceries. I loaded them into my car. I drove home at exactly the speed limit. The entire time, one thought kept repeating in my mind like a mantra. Don't react. Don't give them the satisfaction. Don't let them see you break. By the time I pulled into our driveway, my hands had stopped shaking. The shock was settling into something else, something colder and more focused. I carried the bags inside, put everything away in its proper place, and sat down at the kitchen table. I didn't know what I was going to do yet. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I would not beg, scream, or confront. I would watch. I would wait. And I would let them show me exactly who they were. He came home 2 hours later. I was making dinner, chopping vegetables with steady hands when he walked into the kitchen. He didn't say hello. He didn't kiss me on the cheek like he used to. He just stood there, arms crossed, radiating defensiveness. "We need to talk," he said, his voice sharp. I kept chopping. "About what?" "About you spying on me." I looked up slowly, letting the knife rest against the cutting board. "Spying? I was buying groceries." "You know what I mean." "Follow me around, checking up on me. It's getting ridiculous, Sylvia." The gaslighting was smooth, practiced. He made me sound paranoid, possessive, and unreasonable, like I was the problem. "I wasn't following you, I was shopping." "Then why were you staring at us like that?" "Us," he said to us, the word hung in the air between us like a confession he didn't even realize he'd made. "I wasn't staring, I saw you and said hello." "You're imagining things," he snapped. "You always do this. You blow everything out of proportion." He left the kitchen before I could respond. I heard him go upstairs and heard the bedroom door close firmly. Not a slam, just firm enough to make a point. I stood there alone, the half-chopped vegetables forgotten. And I realized something that made my blood run cold. This wasn't the first time he'd gaslit me. This was just the first time I'd noticed. My name is Sylvia. Before I met my husband, before I became someone's wife, I was a senior analyst at Meridian Consulting, a mid-sized corporate firm that handled financial audits and compliance reviews. I was good at my job, really good. I had a reputation for being thorough, professional, and impossible to rattle under pressure. I liked numbers because numbers didn't lie. They didn't gaslight you or make you question your own memory. They just were. When I met him 5 years ago, I thought I'd found someone who respected that part of me. Someone who valued competence and honesty. I was wrong. Somewhere along the way, I'd become smaller. I'd started second-guessing myself, apologizing for things that weren't my fault, walking on eggshells to keep the peace. I didn't recognize when it started happening. It was gradual, like slowly turning down the volume on a song until you can barely hear it anymore. But that moment in the grocery store had turned the volume back up, loud. Now I was lying in bed next to a man who had just gaslit me about something I saw with my own eyes. And I realized I had a choice. I could keep pretending, keep shrinking, or I could remember who I used to be, the woman who didn't flinch, the woman who solved problems. I couldn't sleep. At 3 a.m, I lay in the dark doing math, not work math, betrayal math. I counted the times my best friend had been at our house in the past 6 months, 14. I counted the nights my husband worked late, 23. I counted the times they'd both been unavailable at the exact same time, 9. I counted the inside jokes that started excluding me, too many to track. My best friend's name was Rachel. We'd met in college, stayed close through everything, celebrated each other's wins, cried through each other's losses. She was the maid of honor at my wedding. She knew my favorite coffee order, my worst fears, the password to my Netflix account. She had a key to my house. She knew when I worked late. She knew my schedule better than I did sometimes. And she had used all of that access, all of that trust, to slip into the gaps of my marriage like water finding cracks in a foundation. I stared at the ceiling, listening to my husband's steady breathing beside me. He was asleep, completely unbothered. Meanwhile, I was doing forensic accounting on my own life, trying to figure out when everything had started to rot. The answer was simple. I didn't know, and that was the worst part. I stopped asking questions. That was the first real decision I made. No more "where were you?" No more "who were you with?" No more giving him opportunities to lie to my face and make me feel crazy for doubting him. Instead, I started watching. Really watching. I noticed that his phone was always face down now, that he took calls in the other room, that he smiled at texts in a way he never smiled at me anymore. I noticed that Rachel's texts came at strange times and that he always waited a few minutes before responding, like he was being careful. I noticed that when the three of us were together, which was rare now, they avoided looking at each other too much, overcompensating. I noticed that he'd started criticizing me more, little things at first. My cooking was too bland. My hair looked better in a different way. I worked too much. It was a classic move, and I'd read about it before. Devalue your partner to justify betraying them. Make them feel like they're not enough so you feel less guilty about looking elsewhere. I didn't confront him about any of it. I just filed it away. Every observation, every inconsistency, every lie. I was building a case, even if I didn't know yet what I was going to do with it. Then I discovered something that changed everything. Rachel worked in marketing for a client company that Meridian Consulting serviced. We were their financial auditors. My husband worked in project management at a tech firm that partnered with both Rachel's company and mine on a major infrastructure project. The three of us were professionally connected. We had been for over a year. That meant shared meetings, shared expenses, shared access to company systems. It also meant policies, rules, ethics guidelines. My company had very strict regulations about conflicts of interest, personal relationships affecting professional judgment, and misuse of company resources. I sat at my desk during lunch, staring at the corporate handbook I'd barely glanced at in 3 years. And for the first time since the grocery store, I felt something other than numb. I felt a flicker of control. This wasn't just a messy personal betrayal anymore. This was a professional intersection. And if they were stupid enough to mix the two, to use work trips, work meetings, or work expenses to cover their affair, then they had just walked into my territory. I closed the handbook. I didn't smile. I didn't feel victorious. I just felt cold, clear, and ready, because numbers don't lie, and I was very, very good with numbers. Rachel's behavior toward me shifted. It wasn't subtle anymore. She stopped pretending. At a company mixer 2 weeks after the grocery store incident, she walked right up to me, drink in hand, and smiled like we were still best friends. "You look tired, Sylvia. Is everything okay at home?" Her tone was sugary, concerned, fake. I smiled back. "Just busy with work, you know how it is." "I'm sure." She took a sip of her wine, her eyes glittering with something mean. "You should take better care of yourself. You don't want to let things slip, you know?" It was a warning wrapped in concern. A little dig to remind me that she had something I didn't, that she was winning. I just nodded. "Thanks for the advice." She walked away, satisfied, but I saw it clearly now. She wasn't just having an affair with my husband. She was enjoying the fact that I knew. She liked the power, the secrecy, the twisted thrill of pretending to be my friend while dismantling my marriage from the inside. That cruelty was her mistake, because people who enjoy hurting others get careless. They start to believe they're untouchable. And that's when they slip. I started keeping records, not in some dramatic, cinematic way. I didn't hire a private investigator or set up hidden cameras. I just did what I did best at work. I documented. I opened a separate, password-protected folder on my personal laptop. Inside, I created a simple spreadsheet. Date, time, observation, evidence, screenshots of text timestamps when my husband said he was at the office but his location showed somewhere else. Copies of work emails where Rachel and my husband were CC'd together on projects that didn't require both of them. expense reports that listed meals, travel, and hotel bookings that overlapped. None of it was illegal. None of it was hacking. It was just paying attention, keeping track, building a timeline. I didn't know what I would do with it yet, but I knew that if the moment came when I needed proof, I would have it. Cold, factual, undeniable. Meanwhile, at home, I played the role of the oblivious wife. I smiled when he came home late. I didn't argue when he snapped at me. I became invisible, compliant, boring, exactly what they expected, because the best way to catch someone off guard is to let them think they've already won. The first test came by accident. There was a work dinner scheduled, a big client presentation. Both Rachel's company and mine were involved. My husband's firm was consulting on the technical side. All three of us were expected to be there. 2 days before the event, I sent a polite email to my supervisor requesting to be removed from the project due to a potential scheduling conflict with another audit. It was approved immediately. I didn't tell my husband. I didn't tell Rachel. I just quietly stepped aside. The night of the dinner, I stayed home. I made tea, curled up on the couch, and waited. My husband came home 3 hours later, flushed and irritated. "How was the dinner?" I asked casually. "Fine, boring, same corporate nonsense." "Did Rachel's presentation go well?" He paused, just for a second. "Yeah, she did fine." I nodded, sipping my tea. "That's good." He went upstairs without another word. The next morning, I checked my work email. There were frantic messages in a group thread. Miscommunication, missing data, overlapping presentations. The client had been confused, annoyed. The project lead had to step in and smooth things over. And buried in the thread was a note from Rachel. "Where was Sylvia? We needed her numbers." They hadn't just expected me to be there. They'd relied on me to cover for their lack of coordination. And when I wasn't there, the cracks showed. I closed my laptop and smiled, just a little. My husband started to change, or maybe he just stopped pretending. He became openly hostile at home, cold in a way that felt deliberate. He criticized everything, the way I dressed, the way I cleaned, the way I talked. "You used to be more fun," he said one night, his tone laced with contempt. "Now you're just, I don't know, boring." I didn't take the bait. "I'm sorry you feel that way." "That's exactly what I mean. You're so passive. You never push back. You never challenge me anymore." He wanted a fight. He wanted me to scream, to cry, to give him a reason to justify what he was doing behind my back. But I wouldn't. I just nodded. Stayed calm. Let him project. The more frustrated he became with my silence, the more reckless he got. He stopped being careful. He left his phone unlocked. He forgot to delete texts. He assumed I wasn't paying attention. And that was exactly what I needed him to think. Because a man who believes his wife is broken, passive, and defeated will stop covering his tracks. And that's when you learn everything. I made an appointment with HR, not to file a complaint, not yet. I just asked questions, hypothetical ones. If someone were concerned about a potential conflict of interest on a joint project, what would the process be? The HR representative, a sharp woman named Ms. Delgado, leaned back in her chair. "We'd need specifics, but generally we take conflicts of interest seriously, especially on audits. Why do you ask?" "Just want to make sure I'm following protocol." "There's a project where personal and professional lines might be blurring." She studied me for a moment. "If you have concerns, you can file a confidential inquiry. It gets reviewed internally without your name attached unless findings warrant further action." I nodded. "Good to know." I didn't file anything that day. I just wanted to understand the process, how the system worked, what doors were available if I needed to walk through them. Ms. Delgado handed me a business card. "If you ever need guidance, my door is open." I took the card, thanked her, left. I wasn't ready to act yet, but now I know how to. And that knowledge felt like armor, quiet, invisible, protective. I was no longer powerless. I was just waiting for the right moment. 2 weeks later, an email went out to the entire company. Subject line, routine internal compliance audit. My stomach dropped, then steadied. Internal audits reviewed expense reports, project timelines, communication records, and resource allocation. They looked for inefficiencies, red flags, conflicts of interest, misuse of company funds. If Rachel and my husband had used company time, company travel, or company resources to cover their affair, this audit would find it. I didn't have to do anything. I just had to let the process run. At lunch, I saw Rachel in the break room. She was on her phone, scrolling anxiously. When she looked up and saw me, her face went tight. "Did you hear about the audit?" "Yeah," I said, pouring coffee. "Routine stuff happens every year. Still, it's stressful." I shrugged. Only if you have something to hide. Her jaw clenched. She didn't respond. She just grabbed her phone and left. I stood there, alone in the break room, holding my coffee. I hadn't filed a complaint. I hadn't tipped anyone off. I had simply removed myself from situations where my presence would cover for them. And now the system I worked in, the system I trusted, was doing exactly what it was designed to do. It was checking for integrity. And they had none. Rachel and my husband grew bolder. I don't know if it was arrogance or panic, but they stopped being careful. I overheard a phone call. My husband laughed, saying, "She's not going to do anything. She never does." At a work event, Rachel made a joke in front of colleagues, something about how some people just couldn't keep up in fast-paced environments. She looked directly at me when she said it. They thought they'd won. They thought I was beaten. They celebrated too early. They laughed too loudly. And they cut corners. I watched from a distance, calm and professional, as they grew sloppy. They missed deadlines. They double-booked meetings. They gave conflicting information to clients. And every time they stumbled, I wasn't there to catch them. I'd removed myself from the safety net. Now they were falling, and I was just watching. Quietly, patiently, with the cold, focused clarity of someone who had already decided how this would end. Then I did something that surprised even me. Instead of exposing them, I requested a temporary reassignment. I told my supervisor I wanted to focus on a different project for a few months, something that would expand my skill set. It was approved without question. That meant Rachel and my husband's joint project no longer had me as a backup, no one to fix their mistakes, no one to smooth over their miscommunications, no one to catch what they missed. I wasn't actively sabotaging them. I was just stepping aside. And in a high-pressure corporate environment, absence is everything. If you remove the competent person from the equation, the system reveals who's actually holding it together. And it wasn't them. The project started to fracture. Deadlines were missed. Reports came back with errors. The client grew frustrated. And suddenly, Rachel and my husband were the sole points of failure. They had no one else to blame. No one else to hide behind. I worked on my new project quietly, turning in flawless reports, meeting every deadline, earning quiet praise from my new team. Meanwhile, their project was unraveling. Brick by brick, and I didn't have to do a single thing. The pressure built. I could see it in my husband's face when he came home. He was stressed, snapping at everyone, drinking more. Rachel called me once. "Sylvia, I need your help. Can you look at some numbers for me? Just a quick favor." I paused, let the silence stretch. Then I said simply, "I'm not on that project anymore." "I know, but you're so good at this. It would only take an hour." "I don't have access anymore. You'll have to ask your project lead." I hung up. She didn't call back. At work, the whispers started. "What's going on with the Arcadia project? Why is everything so behind? Didn't they used to have Sylvia on that?" I kept my head down. I didn't gossip. I didn't engage. I just worked. Steady, professional, unremarkable. Meanwhile, their project was a slow-motion car crash, and everyone was starting to notice. The audit was still running in the background. I'd almost forgotten about it until I saw Ms. Delgado walking through the office with a folder under her arm, her expression unreadable. She didn't look at me. She just walked toward the executive floor. And I knew it was starting. My husband confronted me that night. "What are you playing at?" I looked up from my book. "What do you mean? This, the silent treatment, the coldness, you're punishing me for something." "I'm not punishing you, I'm just living my life. You requested my project. It wasn't your project, and I wanted to work on something else." His face twisted with frustration. "You're trying to make me look bad. I'm not trying to do anything, I'm just letting things run." Letting things run. What does that even mean? I closed my book, looked him in the eye. "It means I'm not fixing problems that aren't mine to fix anymore." He stared at me. For a moment, I saw something flicker in his expression, not guilt, fear. He was realizing, maybe for the first time, that I wasn't going to save him, that I wasn't going to cover for him, that I had stopped playing the role he'd assigned me. He left the room without another word. I sat there alone in the quiet. And for the first time in months, I felt calm, because I wasn't fighting. I wasn't screaming. I wasn't begging. I was just letting the truth run its course, and the truth was brutal. Rachel was called into a formal meeting with HR. I didn't know all the details, but word traveled fast in an office our size. She was questioned about expense reports, about travel reimbursements, about project communications. She came back to her desk pale, shaking. Her confidence was gone. That smug smile had cracked. For the first time since the grocery store, I saw fear in her eyes. She saw me across the office. I didn't look away. I didn't smile. I just met her gaze, steady and calm. She broke first. I looked down at her desk, grabbed her bag, left early. I went back to my work, sent an email, filed a report. I went home at 5 o'clock like I always did. At dinner, my husband didn't speak. He pushed food around his plate, his jaw tight. "Rachel's having a hard time at work," he said finally. "I heard. They're investigating her. Aren't you going to say anything?" I looked up. "What would you like me to say?" He didn't answer. He just stared at me like I was a stranger. And maybe I was. Maybe the woman he married, the one who smoothed things over and made excuses, was gone. And in her place was someone he didn't recognize, someone who didn't flinch. And something I didn't expect happened. Other employees came forward. Not about me, about them. Apparently, Rachel and my husband weren't as subtle as they thought. People had noticed the long lunches, the closed-door meetings that had nothing to do with work, the way they looked at each other. One colleague submitted a formal statement about a work trip where Rachel and my husband shared a hotel room that was billed to the company. Another mentioned inappropriate behavior at a conference. None of it came from me. I hadn't said a word. But once the audit started, once HR began asking questions, people felt safe to speak up about things they'd been uncomfortable with for months. The investigation expanded. It wasn't just about expense fraud anymore. It was about workplace ethics, professional misconduct, abuse of company resources, and suddenly, Rachel and my husband were at the center of something they couldn't talk their way out of. I kept working, kept my head down. Colleagues asked me if I knew anything. I just said, "I trust HR to handle it." And I did, because I didn't have to destroy them. They destroyed themselves. I just had to stop protecting them and let other people see what I'd seen all along. I met with a lawyer. Not a divorce attorney yet, just a consultation to understand my options, what I was entitled to, what I needed to protect. The lawyer, a woman named Ms. Hartwell, listened to everything. The affair, the gaslighting, the grocery store, the recordings, the documentation, the timeline. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair. "You've done this perfectly. You have everything you need, but I have to ask, what do you want?" I thought about that. What did I want? I want out. Cleanly, I want my name clear. My career is intact. I don't want alimony. I don't want revenge. I just want to walk away and never look back. She nodded. "Then we do this quietly, no drama, just paperwork." We filed, no threats, no confrontations, just a legal notice delivered to my husband. He didn't see it coming. When he got the papers, he called me at work, furious. "You filed for divorce?" "Yes," without even talking to me. "There's nothing to talk about." "You can't just leave." "I can, and I am." He sputtered, threatened, tried to guilt me. But I'd already made my decision, and nothing he said could change it. I hung up, went back to work. That night, I slept better than I had in months. Audit findings were released internally. I wasn't privy to all the details, but the results were clear. Rachel was terminated for misuse of company funds and violation of ethics policies. My husband's company was notified of his involvement. He was placed on probation, then quietly let go 2 weeks later. There was no public scandal, no dramatic confrontation. Just quiet, professional consequences, policies enforced, rules applied. The system worked exactly as it was supposed to. And I hadn't had to lift a finger. I just stopped covering for them, stopped making excuses, stopped being complicit in my own betrayal. And once I stepped aside, the truth did the rest. At work, I was approached by a senior partner. "Sylvia, I wanted to commend you for how you handled this situation. You stayed professional, focused, and didn't let personal matters interfere with your work. That's the kind of integrity we value here." I nodded. "Thank you." "We'd like to offer you a promotion, lead analyst, effective immediately." I accepted, not because it was revenge, but because I'd earned it. I'd always earned it. I'd just been too busy holding other people up to reach for it myself. Now I was reaching, and it felt good. 2 weeks after the findings were released, Rachel showed up at my apartment. I almost didn't answer the door, but something made me open it. She stood there, smaller than I remembered. Her hair wasn't perfect. Her makeup was smudged. She looked like she'd been crying. "Sylvia, please, I need to talk to you." I didn't invite her in. "What do you want, Rachel?" "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. I made a terrible mistake." "You made a choice." I know I hurt you." "But you didn't have to destroy my career." I stared at her. "I didn't destroy anything. You did that yourself. You could have just talked to me. We could have worked this out." "Worked it out? You were sleeping with my husband." "It wasn't like that. It just happened. We didn't mean for it to." "Stop." I cut her off. "I don't want your apology. I don't want your excuses. I just want you to leave." Please, Sylvia, I've lost everything, my job, my reputation, my friends. Don't you have any compassion? I looked at her, really looked at her, and I felt nothing, no anger, no pity, just tired finality. You didn't lose your friends, Rachel, you never had them, you had people you used, and when you stopped being useful they left, just like you would have done to them. I closed the door. She stood there for a moment. Then I heard her footsteps, walking away. I locked the deadbolt, and I never saw her again. My husband tried too. He sent emails, long, rambling messages about how he'd made mistakes, how he wanted to fix things, how we could go to therapy. I didn't respond. Then he showed up at my new apartment. I'd moved 3 weeks after filing for divorce into a small one-bedroom closer to work. He somehow found the address. I opened the door with the chain lock still on. What do you want? To talk, to explain. There's nothing to explain. Sylvia, please, I know I screwed up, but we can fix this, we can start over. I don't want to start over, I want to move forward without you. You're really going to throw away 5 years of marriage? You already did that, I'm just filing the paperwork. His face hardened, the mask slipped. You know what, fine, you were always cold anyway, boring, I don't know why I stayed as long as I did. And there it was, the real him. The one who'd been hiding under the apologies. Goodbye, I said, and I closed the door. He didn't come back. The divorce was finalized 2 months later. No drama, no trial, just paperwork. I signed my name. I walked out of the lawyer's office and felt lighter than I had in years. I moved cities 6 months later, not because I was running, but because I wanted to. I got a job offer at a larger firm, a senior position with better pay and more responsibility. I took it. I packed up my apartment, said goodbye to the few people I cared about, and left. I didn't look back. I didn't feel regret. I felt free. In my new city, no one knew my story. No one knew about my ex-husband or my ex-best friend or the quiet, methodical way I dismantled their betrayal. I was just Sylvia, competent, professional, steady. I made new friends. Carefully, I dated eventually, cautiously. I built a life that was mine, not ours, not theirs, mine. And every morning I woke up in my small apartment, made my coffee, and felt grateful, not for what I'd lost, but for what I'd learned. That I didn't need anyone to validate me, that I didn't need to be loud to be strong, that patience and integrity were more powerful than rage. And that sometimes the best revenge is just walking away and thriving. I never heard from either of them again. No messages, no calls, no mutual friends trying to broker peace. They disappeared from my life as completely as if they'd never existed, and I was fine with that, more than fine. I heard through the grapevine that Rachel moved back to her hometown, that my ex-husband bounced between jobs for a while before settling into something mediocre. But I didn't follow up. I didn't care. They weren't part of my story anymore. Looking back now, I realize that the grocery store moment didn't break me. It woke me up. It reminded me that betrayal burns fast and hot, but patience outlasts it. That knowing your worth is the most devastating response of all. I didn't destroy them with anger or revenge. I just stopped participating in their lies. I stepped aside. I let the truth do what truth does, and I walked away with my dignity intact. That's the thing about betrayal. It only has power if you let it, if you beg. If you fight to keep people who don't want to stay. But if you let go, if you trust yourself enough to walk away, then you win, not because you hurt them, but because you freed yourself. And that's all that ever really mattered. What would you do in this situation? Have you ever had to choose between confronting betrayal loudly or handling it quietly? Drop a comment below and share your thoughts. If this story resonated with you, hit that like button and subscribe, because integrity is a choice we make every single day, and your support helps us keep sharing stories that remind us we're not alone. Thank you for being here.